Welcome to CareCast, CareNet's podcast on family, faith, and life with Roland, CareNet's president and CEO, and Vincent DiCaro, CareNet's chief outreach officer. CareCast and more pro-abundant life commentary from CareNet can be found at care-net.org, where you can watch videos, download ebooks, and subscribe to the Abundant Life blog. Now let's listen in on what Roland and Vince have for us this week on CareCast.
Welcome to another episode of CareCast.
Yes.
CareNet's podcast on family, faith, and life with myself, Vincent DiCaro, and this guy right here, Roland Warren, the president and CEO of CareNet. So here we are, Roland, for another exciting episode. I think we have some really good new data and information to talk about when it comes to what it means to, let's not spoil it.
Yeah,
okay?
Let's spoil it.
We're not going to spoil it. Yeah.
Well, I mean, probably the most important thing that we're both wearing shirts that zip in the front.
Yeah, actually, they're both gray. And
they're both gray. And we didn't even talk this morning.
We did not talk this morning.
See, we're just like...
It's like that Spider-Man meme where all the Spider-Mans are like pointing at each other. Like we walked into the office and we saw that.
Yeah, we saw that. Yeah, and I think we've got them zipped to almost exactly. Right, if you had a tape measure and you measured it. Right, yes. Yeah, I think because there's a standard.
Right. We have a standard here at CareNet.
Yeah, because all these things are well managed.
Yes, exactly. Our necks need to be covered, at least in part.
Yeah, because if you go down too far, then it becomes unseemly. Right. And probably ungodly. Unseemly. And
it crosses into that territory.
Yeah, so you can know that.
Yeah. So in fact, when I walked in, there was somebody waiting at the door with a tape measure to make sure I had it.
Yeah.
Zipped.
That's a whole job.
Right. Yeah. It is. Yeah. It is. We hire somebody just for that.
Just for that. It's important.
They're great with a tape measure. So, so we are wearing similar shirts, and what we wanted to talk about today is a brand new or very new. I believe it was released last month, October. We're in November here, just for reference. November of 2025. October of 2025. Gallup released their new national poll about Americans' attitudes about abortion.
Yeah.
And we saw some really interesting things there. I'm sure folks have probably heard and read some commentary on this already. But we, as you like to say, we like to zig where other people are zagging. And so we're hopefully going to cover maybe a different angle on this survey data that folks haven't heard before. So just sort of laying the groundwork in terms of what generally the poll revealed. 30% of Americans believe abortion should be legal under any circumstances. So about a third of the country says abortion at any time for any reason, right?
Right.
55% said it should be legal under certain circumstances. So that's the kind of the quote big mushy middle, right?
Yeah.
So more than half, 55% of Americans say abortion should be legal at least in some cases, right? And then you have a very small number in relative terms, 13% say that it should be illegal in all circumstances.
Yeah.
Right. So you could break that down and say 87% of Americans say that abortion should be legal in at least some circumstances, and only 13% say that it should be illegal in all circumstances.
Yeah.
So that's a decidedly sort of pro-choice outlook that we have in America. They did ask that the mushy middle, the 55%, so to speak, that said it should be illegal under certain circumstances. They asked that 55% to be more specific, and 19% of those folks, 19 out of the 55 said it should be legal under most circumstances, and 35 out of the 55 said that it should be legal in only a few circumstances. So in that sort of big middle ground, that middle ground tends to lean more pro-life.
Yeah.
But obviously there's still circumstances under which they think abortion should be legal. So that's the big picture.
Yep.
Another one of the really interesting things that came out of this poll was that the gender gap in pro-choice identity is at a historic high of 20 points, where 61% of women consider themselves to be pro-choice, and only 41% of men consider themselves to be pro-choice, and that's the biggest gap they've ever recorded.
Yeah.
So really interesting.
Yeah. Pretty
the
cool.
last couple of years, I think, have been where that shift has taken place.
Yeah, and we've been doing a lot to engage men on the issue, I mean, not just in terms of just their attitudes, but frankly, in terms of their actions, in terms of providing that missing support
Right.
can be there, that can lead a woman towards an abortion.
Yeah.
In terms of the guy being the most influential in that decision to abort, and then also her view that he's going to be there, not just from conception to birth, but ongoing. And we always talk about being a husband to her and a father to the child growing inside of her. 87% of the women that have abortions aren't married. So the more men that we have that perspective, and if they put their attitude, if you will, into action, in a practical sense, then that can certainly, even for some of these women who identify themselves as, quote, pro-choice, if they have a guy who says, listen, part of the challenge with these surveys is like, well, why do you have that perspective? Like that second and third question, like, okay, I'm pro-choice. Well, why? Well, because, no one's going to be there to take care of this child that I'm carrying. Therefore, I'm pro-choice. Well, what if a guy said, hey, I'll be a husband to you and a father-child growing inside of you? So there's always the hopeful opportunity to transition there.
Right. These attitudes don't necessarily reflect how people will behave in terms of an unplanned pregnancy, right?
In terms of both sides, because you have people say, I'm pro-life, and then they'll
have an abortion, right?
Then they'll have an abortion. So it is complex for sure.
Absolutely. So really, really interesting. And I think a couple other things. I think the overturn of Roe versus Wade kind of saw a shift where more women started saying that they're pro-choice. Yeah. I think when the reality, I guess, in a certain sense, set in, that the right to abortion could actually seriously be under threat, which of course hasn't really. There are actually more abortions now than before Roe was overturned because of the abortion pill. But I think that the idea that this could actually, oh my gosh, this actually could be taken away now. It's not theoretical anymore. I think that actually drove more women to consider themselves pro-choice. And I think during that same period of time, we've just seen, what I've read in the commentaries is that there's just been a general trend of men, especially young men, actually becoming more conservative. Yeah. And so I think we're simultaneously seeing more men saying they're pro-life and more women saying they're pro-choice. So that gap is just widening on both ends. Yeah. And so the next area that I think is really interesting to cover is actually a very positive trend in a lot of ways around where we see the attitudes of young people shifting. Okay, so they asked 18 to 29-year-olds their views on abortions, the legality of abortion, and we actually saw a flip for the first time. Well, really, it looks like ever on this poll, or at least I shouldn't say first time ever, but a flip that took place recently, which is they asked again, should it be legal under any circumstances, illegal under only certain circumstances, or illegal all the time? And what happened in this latest poll is that the proportion of young people who said that it should be legal under only under certain circumstances actually shot up past the percentage of people who say it should be legal under any circumstances, right? Yeah. So now we're at actually 50% of young people say that it should only be legal in certain circumstances. And that number is up from less than 40, so 37-ish%. So it shot up from 37% to 50%.
Wow. Yeah.
And then the number on the other side of it should be legal under any circumstances went down from about 52% to about 34%.
Yeah.
So big drop there and a big increase on the other side. The percentage of people who say that it should be illegal under all circumstances has stayed pretty steady. Yeah. And that's still at about 15%. And so there hasn't been a ton of change there. But in that middle ground there, young people have kind of shifted more pro-life.
Yeah.
From that perspective.
Yeah, at least wanting to limit abortion in some way, shape, or form, and that again is a hopeful trend that certainly can be built upon. So we're
absolutely
pretty cool.
Yeah. So now the meat I think of where Roland is a meat eater. Metaphorically and literally, I think.
Look at me. Look at
you. Hideous. That's right. Way too much red meat. Not good for you. Although the jury's still out on that, apparently. I don't know. Who knows? I don't know. We're not dietitians or nutritionists, so we'll leave that to the experts.
Yep. That's outside. Here's our expertise, and it's over here.
All I know is that I've been eating a lot of Halloween candy still. So, it's good that when you have two kids, the amount of candy in the house is great. So, So let's kind of dig into some of the, quote, interesting stuff here around political ideology and church attendance.
Yes.
And how that affects whether or not people consider themselves to be pro-life or pro-choice.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll just pick a couple spots here and then I'll let you sort of comment on those. Let's look at political ideology. 78% of conservatives consider themselves pro-life. 34% of moderates, and 12% of liberals consider themselves pro-life.
Right.
Right? There's similar-ish numbers among religious service attendants. So those who attend religious services weekly, 74% of those folks consider themselves pro-life. Mm-hmm. If they go nearly weekly or monthly, that's 57% consider themselves pro-life. And if they seldom or never go to religious services, only 26% consider themselves pro-life.
Well, you also want to talk about the Republicans.
Oh, that's true. Yes, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Talk about that too, yeah.
So 77% of Republicans consider themselves pro-life, 37% of independents, and 12% of Democrats. Now, that 37% of independents, that's a big number. So they ask, like, okay, where do you lean? Do you lean Republican or Democrat? So when they did the lean Republican, 72% consider themselves pro-life, and only 15% of people who are Democrat or lean Democrat consider themselves to be pro-life.
Yeah.
Pro-life. So we see a pretty obvious pattern here. However, the thing that we noted, which is really interesting, is if folks think back to the original data that we shared, in terms of only 13% of Americans, right, say that abortion should be illegal under all circumstances, how do we have nearly 80% of conservatives who consider themselves to be pro-life? In other words, there are a significant number of pro-life people who actually think that abortion should be legal in at least some circumstances.
Yes.
So talk about what that means, Ron. I'm going to leave the hard part to you, but yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes you think. And what it really does, and what the survey doesn't do, but I think what's essential to do is what does it mean to be pro-life? Mm-hmm. And I've been giving a lot of speeches around this topic of late, and one of the things I say is that I don't even know what it means to be pro-life anymore. I mean, the term, it's a political term. It's become a political term in the context that, particularly in terms of how the issue is kind of played out in the public square, it tends to be, led by a political narrative, right? Mm-hmm. Legislation,
right.
All that kind of stuff, right? So you have to, what does it mean to be pro-life, right? Because that's like, what is pro-life? Because clearly some people who believe abortion should be legal sometimes or most of the time, but not all the time, consider themselves pro-life.
Right.
So my thing is like, well, shouldn't we define pro-life maybe from the perspective of the one who's going to be impacted?
Right.
The baby.
Right. The unborn child.
Yeah. So if the unborn child had a vote on this, say, well, what do you think is pro-life? right. That kind of a thing.
That I never get aborted. Yeah.
That I never get aborted.
Right.
Because to me,
at any stage during the pregnancy and for any reason. Right.
And for any reason, if there's any point where I get aborted, that's actually not pro-life.
Right.
Ever.
Right.
For me.
Yeah.
Ever. It's never pro-life.
Yeah.
So what's happened because of this, and this data sort of kind of gets at that these numbers are incongruent, because clearly the term pro-life doesn't mean certainly what the baby in the womb would think it would mean, and frankly from my perspective doesn't mean what in my view a Christian worldview would mean. So you have one person that says, listen, I'm pro-life. Okay, what does that mean? Well, the circumstances of a child's conception and birth should not determine its humanity and worth. Whether it's conceived in love or lust or planned or unplanned, perfectly healthy or fetal abnormality, it doesn't matter. This child is created in the image of God. It's one of God's image bearers and is worthy of life and protection.
Right.
Gotcha. Now, I think, frankly, if you look at the pro-life movement, and certainly at the origins of the pro-life movement, that was how you defined being pro-life. The way that it was this Imago Dei perspective. And then you say, what about you? Well, I'm pro-life too. Okay, well, I'm for a 15-week ban. Okay. Well, how many abortions happen before 15 weeks?
96%.
96% of abortions.
Yep.
Wait, and you're pro-life too? Wait, so and only 3%, 4% of babies live in your pro-life world.
Right.
And you're okay with 96% of the abortions.
Right. Yes. Yeah. And that's clear. We're clearly seeing that play out in the data. Yep.
What about you?
Yep.
Well, I'm pro-life too, and I'm for pain capable. 20 weeks. Right? Because can't they feel pain about 20 weeks or something, whatever?
22, 23, somewhere
around there. So I'm that. Okay, well, how many abortions happen before 20 weeks?
Yeah. Almost all of them.
99%.
Yeah.
So 1% of babies, okay. Yeah. And you're pro-life too.
Right.
Yeah.
In
In this, you have that whole spectrum. Now, if we have the baby having a seat at the table and saying, listen, we just want you to help us sort this thing out. I think the baby would say, well, you 15-week man person, you're not pro-life. You 20-week, you're not pro-life.
Right.
I'm going with the Imago Dei guy.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Yep.
Now, why does that kind of help us see who should lead on this? Because when you look at the data, okay, those who are conservative
or Republican,
right, have numbers similar to those attending church attendance.
Weekly.
So you're like, okay, so conservative, so ostensibly, and I know that this is conflated, but you would say, okay, this person is a conservative person. That means that they're going to be pro-life, right? Even if they don't go to church.
Right. Yep.
And this person is a church-going person, even if they don't vote Republican, right?
Right.
Those guys together, they're both going to be pro-life,
right?
Ostensibly, if you pull the data apart, and I know it doesn't work out
on average, sure,
but on average, you say that,
right.
But then you say, okay, well, who's got the more durable position on this? That's going to stand the test of time.
And whose position actually solves the problem?
And whose position actually solves the problem?
Right.
Because remember, I got the baby here. Kind of, he's part of at the table, kind of going through it. So, who do you want to lead this thing?
Right. The person who's framing abortion as primarily a political issue, where the position has even within the last couple of years has changed dramatically.
Yes, well, dramatically from what we just talked about.
Right, exactly. Right. Yes.
In 2012, when Mitt Romney was running for president, the Republican position was against abortion in all cases, and then there was a debate about 3% of abortions, rape, the health of the mother.
Rape, incest, life of mother,
which was about 3% of the abortions, roughly.
Right.
So the party was against 97% of the abortions,
that's right,
and was debating about 3.
Yes, correct.
It's totally flipped now,
right,
in terms of the Republican platform.
Right. So they're against late-term abortions, right, which are only 3%, but they're okay with and all the ones that take place that are not late-term.
And that's just in 12, 13 years. It flipped.
Yep.
But the biblical understanding
that hasn't changed. And ever.
So if you got to pick a horse,
right? Yep.
Right, and by the way, trying to ride 2 horses
can be difficult.
Is problematic.
Drawn and quartered.
Yep. So if you're going to pick a horse, seems to me, the horse I'm picking.
Yeah, for sure. The other important distinction there, right, is let's just assume for a second that the numbers are telling us what they appear to be telling us, right? 78% of conservatives, 72% of Republicans say they're pro-life, and 74% of weekly religious service attenders say they're pro-life. As we've often talked about here, having the quote-unquote right attitude around that issue doesn't necessarily mean that you have the right solution. Right.
Right actions.
Right. The right actions as a result of having that right attitude. Right. So again, if you have framed abortion as primarily a political issue, and that's what your motivation is, it's my conservatism and or my republicanism that has caused me to be pro-life, you might not necessarily be thinking about it in terms of how CareNet has framed it in terms of what it means to be pro-life from a Christian perspective.
Which is pro-abundance
life.
Right,
which is pro-abundant life. So exactly. So our hope is that the folks who are saying that they're pro-life, who are motivated by their religious experience, right, and their church-going experience, that those folks have a more robust and holistic view of what it actually means to be pro-life, and therefore understand that there are more actions that need to be taken to address the abortion issue aside from passing good laws and overturning bad laws, right? Those things are of course important, right? Yes. But if you framed it exclusively as this is a political issue, and you're motivated by the politics, and that's how you define your pro-life, you're just going to keep on saying, well, we just need more laws, we need better laws, we need to overturn more bad laws, whereas the pro-abundant life perspective that we're hoping that people have, and which can only really come through the church, is one where they're like, yeah, we get all that, but we also need to be ministering to people. We need to be supporting pregnancy centers. We need churches to be doing pro-abundant life ministry.
Yep. We
need to be helping women and men in our own circle of influence, choose life, etc. Like all that other stuff, right?
Yeah. No, totally, because Because what happens is if it's primarily through a political lens, and this is what we're seeing. First off, politics shifts, it changes, and so your pro-life position is tied to a platform,
right,
which gets negotiated once every 4 years.
Yeah.
And this time it got negotiated, and the fundamental right, the child having a fundamental right to life, got cut out.
Right.
Fighting for a human life amendment, which is basically personhood, no longer part of the platform.
That's right. Yep.
So that got cut out.
Yep.
So your pro-lifeism is being defined based on a platform that changes. Whereas if you're a Christian, your pro-lifeism, if you will, should be defined based on the Word of God, which is the same yesterday, today, and forever. It doesn't go through an election cycle. It doesn't take a temperature of what the populace might say is the perspective today. It's got a framework that's immutable, right? That says basically the circumstances of a child's conception and birth doesn't determine its humanity and worth, whereas the political narrative says the circumstances of a child's conception and birth, in some cases, determines its humanity and worth.
Right. That's right. Yep.
And so whatever that party over time says, then that to me is fragile. Those two things are not linked together. So from an action standpoint, right? If you're politically leaning, then my action is to vote. I mean, so I always tell people, pro-life perspective in terms of how it played out in the public square is designed to lead you to the polls. A pro-abundant life perspective is designed to lead you to the cross.
That's correct. Yep.
Right? And that's where you get God's designed for family, God's call to discipleship, the church leading on this issue, right? This pro-abundant life perspective based on John 10:10. Life begins at conception, right, to natural death.
Right.
Therefore, Christ wants folks to have life in the womb to the tomb, right?
Right.
So all of that perspective doesn't change.
Right. Correct.
Right. It doesn't change, and what it means to have abundant life in the context of the biblical narrative doesn't change. But what it means to have life in a political narrative actually does, because you have people calling themselves quote pro-life when they're okay with the majority of abortions, and they're still called pro-life because they're against some of them, even as much as 1% will still classify you as being pro-life. But again, with the virtual baby sitting here, kind of going like, that ain't pro-life.
It doesn't sound pro-life to me. No, for sure. Yeah, and I think just another side note too, which maybe is worth noting, which is that 74% of people who sit in church, and this is just religious service in general, so it could be other non-Christian religions as well, but people who are weekly attending religious services, only 3 out of 4 of those folks are consider themselves pro-life. So I guess one way to think about that is that when you're sitting in church on Sunday and you're looking at the people who are there every week, right? 1 out of 4 of those folks. So if you're in your row and your row of seats or your pew or whatever, and there's 20 of you there, 5 of those folks consider themselves to be pro-choice.
Yes.
So I think we have to just be conscientious about that and realize that there's still a lot of work to be done, even among church-going Christians.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? And again, that's people who are there every week. If you go down to people who are there nearly weekly or monthly, we're getting close to 50-50 there, right? Because only 57% of those folks consider themselves to be pro-life. So if you're going to church, let's say twice a month, right? And you're seeing all the other people around you there, I recognize they're here about twice a month. More than a third of those people are consider themselves to be pro-choice. And so that's, let's say, concerning.
Yes, absolutely.
For sure. So
and that's one of the reasons why, in the book here, The Alternative to Abortion, I want to play my own Vanna here for a second.
Right. It's beautiful. The book's beautiful.
We talk about that issue. That's one of the frameworks in the back. Is the pro-choice position consistent with the life and teaching of Christ? It's there, and you can get that. There's a QR code that we can actually put that up. That you can download that free, because that's exactly who that's targeted for. There are so many people who consider themselves Christians, who call themselves Christians, who are also pro-choice. You know, and kind of what I walk through in that framework, which we won't do here, it's basically that it's inconsistent. Like being a Christian and having the pro-choice position, those two things are inconsistent based on the call of Christ, which is living out the Great Commandment to fulfill the Great Commission. And I walk through how you find abortion in the Great Commandment, right? How abortion is a violation of the Great Commandment. Right. I walk through how, and abortion is a violation of the Great Commission, and I walk through how. So there's a truckload of work to do, but I think it's just takeaways as we kind of close up. You got to define what it means to be pro-life, which the survey doesn't really do.
Right. Yeah.
And my view is we should let the baby define what it means to be pro-life, since it's the one that's going to be impacted.
Yeah, because really, in that sense, the most important question is do you believe abortion should be illegal in all circumstances? And again, we're only at 13% on that.
Right, and so what that basically means in the context of what I said was that if you don't say yes, then you're saying, yes, the circumstances of a child's conception and birth should determine its humanity and worth.
That's right. And whether or not it's worthy of protection.
Exactly. 87% of the folks answered in this survey answered that question. Said yes, the circumstances of a child's conception and birth should determine its humanity and worth. Walk through that. I mean, that's the same perspective that held people like me that look like me, not just my faith but my color. But,
right. I understood what you. I understood what
well,
you were
I got to make sure.
Right.
I clarify that. You know, who are black or know. Slaves.
Right.
Why? Because the circumstances of a black woman's conception, the circumstance of a black child's conception and birth, like it came through a black mother and a black father, determined its humanity and worth.
Right.
Same perspective held by the Nazis with the Jews.
Right.
Circumstances of a child's conception and birth. Wait, you come through Jewish parents. Well, that determined your humanity and worth. And so when you answer yes to that question, you're aligning yourself with some of the most heinous atrocities in human history.
That's right.
And there are more you could actually add, but those are the two that just come to mind right away.
Yeah.
That's why it's so problematic. And frankly, the church should answer that question from an Imago Dei perspective.
For sure.
Which is why you reject abortion and why you reject the Holocaust.
Yeah. And just to clarify, when I mentioned that, you look around your church and 1 out of 4 people that goes there weekly consider themselves pro-choice, I didn't mean for that to be, therefore, church-going Christians are the only ones who have an obligation to sort of fix that. I think the church has an obligation.
The local church,
like the leadership of the church and pastors, right? They have an obligation to do something about that. And I think a lot of people who are sitting in church pews who consider themselves to be pro-choice are that way because they've seen the failure of the local church to actually help women and men facing unplanned pregnancies, provide for them the care and the compassion and the help that they need in order to choose life and to thrive and form a family and be discipled. And so they're like, gosh, my own church or the churches that I'm seeing around me aren't even really helping these people. So how can
And the other thing too, which I think is really important, is that if the pastor of local church is not speaking about this issue from the pulpit, and I've heard of pastors say, I don't bring this because it's too political, right?
Right.
They're right. So they don't talk about it from the pulpit. Well, the podium is still talking about it.
Right. The political.
So you think about it was a debate, right? And you've got the podium, which is the kind of a political narrative, right? And then you have the pulpit. One guy's at the podium, the other guy at the pulpit. The guy at the podium comes out and gives its perspective on some issue. And then the spotlight goes to the pulpit and there's no one there.
Yeah.
What do you expect the masses to believe? Yep. Like, your responsibility is actually helping folk understand, well, what the guy said at the podium, let me tell you why, from the pulpit perspective, this is inconsistent. This is inconsistent with the Word of God. But if there's no one there speaking that, then what do you expect the masses to do, even in churches? Well, they adopt the worldview of the culture,
right?
And the podium, right, is the culture, right? The political narrative, the media, all that's all taking its step up to the podium,
right?
Because any old joker can walk up to the podium and say anything, and the masses are hearing. But the pulpit, well, you don't just let anybody walk up to a pulpit and say anything, right?
That's
so,
right. Yep.
So that's why it's so critically important for local pastors to be talking about this issue, because if you don't, then pro-life, if you will, gets defined by the podium.
That's right.
And that's why our counter to that is no pro-abundant life is defined by the Word of God, which is proclaimed from the pulpit.
Absolutely. So, and I think a great place to wrap it up. And so, yeah, we'll obviously continue to keep our eye on Gallup. They release polls regularly, and so obviously there's a few positive things that we're seeing in there, but a lot of obviously very, very concerning things. And again, it's we need to help the church embrace this pro-abundant life perspective so that we can lead on this.
Amen.
All right, thank you, Roland.
All right, take care.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of CareCast. For more pro-abundant life commentary and practical resources, please visit care-net.org. There you can subscribe to the Abundant Life blog, giving you access to videos, ebooks, podcasts, and other resources to help turn your pro-life passion into pro-abundant life action. Until next time, we pray that God blesses you and yours daily.